All righty. Welcome to Navigating Education, the podcast, your go-to resource for exploring and evolving the landscape of education. Whether you're a parent, guardian, student in the school system, an educator, a school leader, or a policymaker, or just simply someone that's passionate about education and wants just valuable insights about what's going on and practical strategies to navigate your context in education, this is the podcast for you. Each episode, we invite thought leaders, innovators, and experts from diverse fields to share their expertise and experiences, offering real-world examples and actionable advice. Together, we'll dive into challenges and opportunities that educators and students face today, explore research-based strategies and approaches for teaching and learning, and discuss policies shaping the present and future of our schools. Join us as we navigate the present and the future of education, empowering you with the tools and inspiration needed to make meaningful impact in your educational community. I'm Dr. Matt Rhodes, and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm an EdTech and instructional leader, professor, and author. I can't wait to jump into today's topic. Find me on social media at Matt Rhodes 1990 or Dr. Rhodes EDU. And I look forward to joining you on today's journey. Speaking of today's journey, let's dive into today's topic, and it's back to school tips and advice for students, teachers, and school leaders with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Casey Jakubowski. Hey, Casey, how you doing?
Matt, thank you so much, and congratulations on all of your achievements. A new book, your podcast being produced. This is awesome. I'm so glad that we got together and wrote that 50 tips book.
I know. Speaking of that, I mean, I think that a lot of that's going to come into our conversation today about, tips for students, teachers, school leaders, and the school community as they navigate the beginning of the school year. And I think that hopefully, many of these tips that we talk about resonate with our listeners. But before we get started, I want to have our audience get to know you a little bit more. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background in education and how you got to where you are today before we jump into today's conversation about back to school.
Absolutely. I am a proud Buffalo, New York native where I grew up and went to SUNY Fredonia for my undergrad to become a social studies teacher doing middle and high school. And I went into rural education because as a suburban boy, I didn't know what to expect. And when I got there, I noticed a lot of really hardworking students who really piqued my interest. And also what happened was the school was going through a consolidation study, and that wound up becoming my pursuit for my master's degree from Binghamton and my doctorate from Albany. The other area I noticed, Matt, was besides this emphasis I have on rural education was the number of times, and I include myself in this, where novice teachers, folks under 5 years of experience, changed schools. And then, after I had gotten a few years in the profession, I left it to go into higher education. And so that's why when you're like, hey, we really ought to write 50 tips for new teachers, I was like, absolutely. Because I had written a couple of other books, one of them being Thinking About Teaching, and a second one called A Cog in the Machine, where I talk about the professional journey of a teacher and the resources that we need to have. I wrapped it up with Getting to the Hearts of Teaching, where I flip the STEM on its head and I say, you really got to start with the humanities before you can do anything else. And you're getting an exclusive. I am pleased to announce that EduMatch, which is our relationship, grew into School Rubric. And School Rubric is the publisher that's producing my first ever children's book, Treasures from Aunt Terry's Attic, which is a little bit of a mystical sci-fi, but it's also about the immigrant experience of my family as recorded to me by the stories my great Aunt Terry told me and the objects from our family's journey from Poland to the United States. And it's going to be out August 31st. And again, School Rubric, it's going live. It's really cool. It's designed for 4th through 6th graders, but it's really a good thing that, families could read so that they could get an idea about their families.
Yeah, and I think that you have so much going on and you've done so much in your career. I mean, for our audience, Dr. Casey has been at essentially every level of education, from all the way up in primary school, all the way up to higher ed. And he focuses on a lot of rural education. So I think it's really, brings a really interesting perspective to talking about what's going on in schools, because I think a lot of the conversation goes towards more urban and suburban. And he obviously has some experience there too. But I think that he brings a really great lens to that discussion. And he's done almost everything in schools as well, from being a teacher, school administrator, working at the district office, and then also in higher ed settings. So he's done a lot and brings a very really broad perspective into this conversation. So it's always fantastic to have you here. And just as we get started really with this conversation, just want the listeners to check out the podcast on WDJM 99.1 radio, Spotify, YouTube, and at MatthewRhodes.com. And let's jump into really focusing on, back to school. As we're recording this episode, is back to school season across the country. And I think everyone has jitters, anticipation, goals, and really it's going to be an interesting year. I think, we're in 2024 now, and it's, a number of years removed from the COVID-19 pandemic. And I really think that in my opinion, it feels kind of normal-ish versus it feels like we're back in 2018 and 19, obviously with differently, things that are different. But I feel like that this kind of feels in earnest a little bit normal. And we're going to talk now just about what Dr. Casey and I think about what some of these major trends are for students, teachers, school leaders, and families as we go into the school year. So as we're starting this 2024 school year, what do you think are some of these major trends, Dr. Casey?
Dr. Matt, great question. First of all, what we've got to look at is socio-emotional learning, and specifically how we're working with mental health. We are still in a time period where everybody is trying to desperately get back to normal, but it's just beyond our grasp. It almost feels like we're trying to nail Jello to the wall when it comes to normalcy. And that's really impacting our mental health. That's really impacting our socio-emotional learning. And I also think one of the other areas that we really have to focus in on is burnout. And many of you may be thinking, well, wait, it's August, it's back to school. How can you have burnout? Well, one of the areas that we've found out in our work, and I found out specifically when I wrote Thinking About Teaching and a Cog in the Machine, is that 2 months really isn't enough recovery time for a lot of folks. This year, there is a lot of people on social media talking about how nobody's really ready to go back. The newer folks want to go back. The students want to come back in many ways because they're looking forward to seeing their friends. They're looking forward to having lunch. But people have anxiety in addition to anticipation. And so I think one of the biggest areas that school leaders are going to have to navigate this year is how to help their professionals be at the top of their game, when in reality, the game has changed. And I think the third area that I want to bring up is artificial intelligence, or AI. For most people, we hear it as ChatGPT, but that's only part of it. What I think really is going to happen is you're going to see artificial intelligence explode. This is really going to be the first year where folks are really going to have to get used to artificial intelligence being permanently there. And I'm wondering if that's why we're seeing so many districts say, when you're at our school from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever your school hours are, you can't use your cell phone. Period. End of story. So I think for parents, what they need to be thinking about is how are they going to work with their children who are so up on technology, but they're going into a place where they're being told the most present technology isn't really something that they can be utilizing during the school day. So there's a lot going on. I don't know how we're all going to do it. I think we're going to need coffee. Thank you for some of the chains out there that are providing teachers free cup of coffee every day for the month. And if you're a chain restaurant, you're not providing teachers with a free cup of coffee, you might want to think about it, because it's all better for us if we're caffeinated.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's with these trends, and I think there's just a lot going on with, how can we, rejuvenate all, various parties in education, whether you're students, teachers, school leaders, and even, parents, as it's very, exhausting to get through the entire year. And with the anticipation start of school, I'd say, on the student side, they're really geared towards coming back, and like you said, I think for younger teachers, they're starting the profession to have more energy, and I think school leaders also coming in. It's a toss up for where you go, depending on the culture of that school building and district, on whether they're geared up and ready to go. I just think that, school leaders, districts, school boards, just providing opportunities for and supports for teachers throughout the year and for themselves, because education in 2024 is a completely different ball game than it was in 2015. Mm-hmm. And I think that with this being an election year, it's definitely going to be another added variable into this. And I think everyone should keep that in mind, at least until December, as I think this next few months is definitely going to be exhausting for everyone as we approach Election Day in November. I would say for school leaders and teachers, as we go into the school year, is that we need to figure out ways to create a sustainable practice. And what does sustainability look like in your particular context? Or, giving yourself more planning time, or teachers more planning time, cutting down on the number of meetings, ensuring that teachers have the resources to have all the supplies in their class, to have support from administrators if they're trying to ban phones or for behavior. I think that goes a long way in creating really those routines and procedures around that, and just ensuring that there's that buy-in. It goes a long way. Specifically, like when I was teaching at high school and I didn't get support, and I wanted to take a phone away from a student because they were just, disengaged and weren't a part of the conversation. And when I didn't get administrative backing and the student was back in my class in 5 to 10 minutes, it definitely caused even more disruption. And it definitely made me feel, as a teacher at that point, like I wasn't supported, and that caused burnout. But in situations in years after and even before, if that one situation was de-escalated and there was consequences given to that student, and we had a good discussion back and forth on, when should you use your phone or keep it in the back in the cubby, that, it definitely made me feel like I was supported, and a lot, I didn't have to express as much energy to, to make sure that, class was in order, and to navigate that situation with that student. I also think just what you mentioned about artificial intelligence is huge too. And I think that there's a lot of practical applications that we need to continue to talk about in education, specifically on the teacher side. Let's not even talk about the student side right now, because I think that we could go down a rabbit's hole with this notion of cheating and whatnot using AI tools. But I think that, when it comes to teachers and school leaders, that I think with these tools is that we can create a lot of personalized and resources and instructional materials, and differentiated, so various reading levels that you could have in your lesson, and really just building out that content much more quickly and efficiently. And also, if you have to write a report, you can use some of these tools to take some of the information that you have and create a report much faster and without taking as much time. And ultimately, I think for teachers, and this is how I, as a ed tech leader in working professional coaching with these teachers, is that when I introduce AI tools to them, is that I want to give you back your time, whether it's to work with students, whether it's to plan, whether it's to take another sip of your coffee. I just really want to, my carrot to them is let's give you back time. And also too, with these AI tools, is that we can create these different resources and instructional materials that can support your diverse students in your class. And like I mentioned earlier, with the reading level, to creating different, what we call playlists, where you do a number of activities at first, and then after you've gotten a lot of the content, you can then give them a couple choices on what they would like to complete so that they can demonstrate their learning. So, I mean, there's a lot there, and I'm hopeful that some of these AI tools, can really help cut down on all these administrative tasks and planning time for teachers this school year. And having a lot of these AI tools been out now for about 2 years, it's I think that there's been a really major uptick on their usage, and educators and teachers are one of the largest groups of the uptake of AI tools. So I think that that's really it's really interesting, and it'll be an interesting trend moving into this school year as we talk more about the student side of things as well.
Yeah, and Matt, your point about AI, I think, especially when it comes to grading, as a former social studies teacher and somebody who has done a lot of work with elementary teachers, there are certain content areas and certain grade levels where there is an astronomical amount of grading going on. And I think part of it is that we need to do less is more and do less better. I think part of it is that, is particularly in New York State and Maryland, two places where I've practiced, as well as provided consulting work, there is just so much content to cover. But if you do less, you get better results. And what I mean by that is, instead of trying to do everything, look specifically for those power standards and look specifically for those power activities. But also, especially if you're an elementary teacher and you're working with K through 6, every single K through 6 classroom I have been in over my 20 plus year career, you can really tell that teachers who start with the relationships and they build positive relationships with their students are well and truly ahead of the game. But they also need to do something else, which is they need to provide scaffolding feedback that helps people grow. Far too many students hate handing in work to get graded because it's a negative interaction. And yet what we see at the collegiate level, and when you and I are both working on doctoral level committees, it's not what did you do wrong, it's what we liked and how you can get better. And I think this, maybe I'm stealing thunder for our next question here, but really, you gotta go to the basics. Know the child's names, know the child's pronouns, know the child's identity, know what that individual child is interested in and what they like. I had a student who hated history until I allowed this 9th grader to look at everything there was about cavalry, horses, lived on a horse farm, grew up on a horse farm, cared for 20 horses. He was literally mucking crap out every morning before school. This kid hated social studies until he started to realize that horses were involved in everything. And they shifted from something that the very wealthy owned to something that everybody owned, back to something the uber wealthy owned. And to this day, I remember his final essay on the final end of the year Global 10 Regents exam, where he knocked it out of the park, talking about how horses made such a difference in exploration. And the cool thing was because we took a little bit of time to get to know each other, and because we took a little bit of time to be interested, you and I and every other practitioner who is out there knows that if you go in treating the kids as numbers or as a bother, you're never going to be able to get to the heart of the matter, which is it's education to help students improve. The other thing you have to do, and this is really, I think, a critical part about building a positive and inclusive classroom, is model mistakes. Model learning opportunities. Say it's okay if we get something wrong. It's okay if we try and we're not successful on the first activity. In entrepreneurship and in business, everybody talks about they want people who can fail fast, and recover even faster. You know, Carol Dweck and Angela Duckworth talked about grit and they talked about determination. But realistically, I think we did it better, which is model the thinking process, model the opportunities, model experience. And then finally, the last area to set the tone, in my personal opinion, is now, especially during the election season, you have to say we agree to disagree, and we're going to do it politely. We can talk about what we are seeing and what we are hearing, but what we need to do is we need to have a courageous dialogue. Mm-hmm. We need to treat others as equals. And one of the things that I find very frustrating, and I actually wrote a chapter about J.D. Vance's book in my work thinking about teaching, was I talked about the fact that it mischaracterizes Appalachian, rural, working class folks. And others who are way smarter than I have written on the actual blow by blow where he got it wrong. But overall, I think there is a lot of tension in America right now, and there's a lot of tension in the political process. And people are going to say stuff that should not be tolerated in the classroom. And as teachers, we also have to be brave to say, yes, we value your point, we value your opinion. We don't value the ad hominem or the personal attacks. You can disagree with everybody's policies, but we will agree that nobody is cruel. And that's where it goes. Because if we don't do that, Matt, we're going to lose the community in education. Right now, we have the only place where everybody comes together with a shared goal and a shared ideology, which is to improve themselves, to make themselves, their community, and the world better.
No, and I agree. And I think that, as we segue into this question of, what are some strategies to establish a positive, inclusive classroom environment, I think that you hit the nail on the head, especially in the climate that we were in on an election year. And just from the basics of setting these norms and routines for, especially if a disagreement comes, especially if it's a political one, hey, let's agree to disagree, and let's focus on, if we're in that opportunity for a teaching and learning moment, that let's look at what actually is this policy or idea versus any of the ad hominem attacks. And I think that as we move into this school year, it's critical that, not only just like knowing a student's name, but just really understanding their background, their ideas, and their interests, because we want to create these spaces where students feel free to express themselves. And I think that really the beginning of the year sets the tone and for the rest of the year. And ultimately, teachers need to, continue to develop these spaces over the course of the year. And in certain scenarios and situations, can alter the course of an entire school year. And I think we just got to be judicious in really focusing on routines and just ground rules, and just really being clear about what is going to fly versus what's not going to fly in your classroom. And I think that, that carries on to, parenting in the house is that you set these routines and ground rules and ensuring that, you can be productive and you can do the things that you enjoy and improve yourself, which is what Dr. Casey said is the goal of, I think, education. And as we move into this school year, I think just whether you're a principal, a school board member, a teacher, a student, is to really just hopefully can buy into the routines of your school and just an opportunity for people to feel included in schools and for there to be an ongoing dialogue and opportunities for, conflict resolution and really not focusing on the, personal attacks, but rather let's focus on, if we're going to have any dialogue within schools, whether it's in higher education all the way down through our schools, is that we need to focus on ideas and focus on why people think a certain way. And speaking of that, one activity that I really like to do as we move into a school year is what we call empathy maps. And a educator by the name of George Valenzuela introduced this essentially where you get to learn more about the student and, what they like, they dislike, their interests, some interesting pieces about their history if they'd like to share, how will be the best way to communicate with them. And it's all on this piece of paper or a digital tile where you can share it with the rest of the class and keep it as a mainstay, which I think is a great way to for not only the teacher and that student to get to know each other better, but for also that classroom community of learners. So there's a lot of different things that we can do to get ready for the school year. And I think parents and families really just, as we do in classroom, just set these routines with students of, getting up to go to school a certain time, making sure that you have the opportunity to have a good breakfast if you can beforehand, going to bed at a certain time every single night, allotting time at home for whether your school assigns homework or reading, as well as having opportunities for play or physical activity. I think all those things, just, devoting as much time as you can. And I'm a proponent for structure in classrooms and I think at homes in general. But I just think it's really just the big emphasis is focusing on these routines. What do you think, Casey?
Absolutely, Matt. And here's the biggest part about the routines. I'm going to challenge every single administrator out there to be visible and walk around the building and do something crazy. And what I mean by that was this past year, I would intentionally take orders for beverages from my teachers. And what I would do is if they asked for ice water, I would get them ice water. If they wanted tea, I'd get them tea. If they wanted coffee, 1 cream, 2 sugars, how do you want it? And I'd also tag in, tag out. So if, somebody was dragging a little bit, I'd walk their students to their specials, or I'd pick them up from the special and I'd walk them back. Or I'd say, hey, you've got 5 minutes to do whatever you need. Do you need to run to the restroom? Do you want to take a little extra time at lunch? And that was because as a district level administrator in a small district that was a single building, I had the privilege and the opportunity to do that. We also were very fortunate in that we did not have a lot of student, quote, disciplinary issues. And, for me, what I thought was really interesting and important was a lot of the teachers were thrilled that I would say every day, every morning, good morning, thank you for what you do for our students. And I wrote them all handwritten notes the first week of school, catching them doing something good, the teachers. And also what I did was I would every Friday after, the contract hours had expired, I would walk around and I would say, "Hey, go home. You put in one baller of a week this week." And they'd be like, "No, no, no, I have more copying to do, or I have more of this, or I have more of this." But what I always did was I always thanked them for getting through the week and doing an amazing job. And I would call out at our faculty meetings, if I was invited, some great activities I saw. I also celebrated when our state test results data indicated that we were doing quite well and that we had seen improvement. Because you know what? A lot of times we focus in on what we're not doing right, yet all the research says we have to focus in on our strengths. We have to double, triple, quadruple down on our strengths. That's how we get better. We also have to be there for each other. We have to make sure that every single adult feels supported in addition to the children. We focus a lot on how are the children doing, but we forget about the adults, the teachers' aides, the teachers' assistants, the cafeteria folks, the custodial staff, the bus drivers. I don't know how many of you have this opportunity to, but getting a 50 count of donut holes for the entire staff isn't that expensive. But if you say, "I noticed you all pulled together last week and I wanted to say, do not forget how awesome you all are." It's a stupid little play on words, but dang, did it go far. The other area is that the leaders have to model humility as well as humanity. So one of the areas that I think is very crucial is that I would stop checking email hard at 5:00 at night. And I would say, if it's an emergency, text to me. But most of the time, the emergencies weren't really emergencies. My reaction would make them into an emergency. Take it down a notch. Unless it's about student safety or an adult's safety. Think, ask, opine. Get yourself an opinion think tank group. Because one of the areas that happens is when you're in your office all the time, you start to think that your opinion is the most important in the room. But Matt and everybody who's listening to me, principal is actually short for the original name in the 1800s. Principal teacher. A principal is by and far first teacher. We had, because of sub shortages this past year, a number of times when we were all in classrooms. We were all covering things like hall duty, cafeteria duty. It would get really tiring. But you know what was even more tiring? Were the other adults who just said, "I've got a lot going on in my life." I had a kindergarten teacher who was amazing. Her mom had sepsis. She had to fly out to Chicago from little old upstate New York because her mom was very sick. We had another teacher, one of the salt of the earth English teachers whose wife worked in the district and whose kids was there. One day after school, he had a stroke. He was 43 years old and he had a stroke. The amount and the impact of not having him in the classroom, having him as a coach, having him as a leader, but more importantly, as a son, a father, a husband, and an uncle. Please, leaders, don't ask for miracles and then provide pennies. If you want your folks to be above and beyond, ask yourself, is it because it's your ambition or is it a collective ambition? And stop changing just to change. I cannot tell you how many millions of dollars of resources are sitting in closets unused because somebody gets a bright idea that they're going to change the curriculum resources or they're going to change the application of something. I'll say this. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes you don't need a Kahoot. Sometimes you just need to play around the world. You don't often, you might not need a knockdown, drag out Google slide presentation. Maybe you just got to have a good chart paper and pen, you know? And I know, Matt, you're a tech guy, you love your tech, but I'll tell you, there's this need to always have something that bips and buzzes and bings and boops. But quite often what I've found is that I retain it better if I do a little bit of old school. And I know for a lot of the students, when they did the chart paper exercise in social studies in 5th grade, they were like, boy, these drawings are bad. But they remembered it 6 months later because they're like, oh yeah, Krog, the Stone Age man who was a stick figure, right? But also because they got to do something that we've lost, which is the final thing the leader needs to do, which is to promote dialogue, discussion, conversation in the cafeteria, in the hallways, greet, ask, make sure everybody's okay. Go around, do an okay or a thumbs up or a thumbs down sign to make sure your folks are in the right place. And have a signal with them that if they need to tap out for a minute, if they touch their nose or they pull their ear, you cover for 5 minutes while they go compose themselves. Because remember, the majority of student behavioral issues were escalated by an adult not thinking. And if we could stop that, if we could stop the adults' uber reactions, I think we could have a calmer system.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack from what you said, and you segued directly into what we want to talk about next, like leadership priorities and for this school year, for whether you're a school leader or you're a district leader, or even a policymaker. And just what you said, I think really resonated with me was this notion of gratitude and being gracious for those around you, and to lead with gratitude. Always say thank you, whether it's the end of the day or whether it's a Friday, just to give them a nice positive note of gratitude. And to, I think what goes really along with this idea of gratitude is less is more. And I think if we focus on some just major themes versus a lot of small little items, I think that we can go a lot further as leaders. And I think that just keeping some consistency and coherence with those themes throughout the school year is key as well. So I think that there's a lot that school leaders have on their plates. It's not an easy job at all. I think it's one of the hardest jobs to be in currently in education, as there's a lot of pressures from teachers, parents, guardians, the school board, students. There's a lot of pressure associated with the job and a lot of responsibilities. Besides being that head teacher, I really do think the school year has evolved into really the school CEO, where they got to do a lot of different things, where they have to talk to all these various stakeholders that I mentioned to make sure everyone's safe, to ensure that teaching and learning is happening. And it's not easy. But I think, though, what Dr. Casey was saying is that there's a lot of things that school leaders can do that I think that can help build staff and faculty morale, and I think take things off their plate as well, because I think they need to practice to think less is more, especially on trying to not have as much email and have less meetings. If it can be sent in an email, I think it shouldn't be a meeting. I think that for professional development, have a few here and there, but focus on providing really good feedback and modeling what really good practices are. And I love your chart paper example. And I think that, you can model how to do all these various types of activities and assignments and strategies. And you don't need the tech at times, for sure. And I think that really, from my philosophy is that you use a strategy, pedagogy before you use any of the tech, and that you try to create as balance of approach as possible. So there's just so much to unpack this. And
I want to add one more thing in there too. Consider getting a therapy animal for your school as a leader, because therapy dogs, therapy horses, whatever. There's been a ton of research that says that petting a dog or reading to a dog or doing math with a dog or a cat provides so much confidence to children, but also the adults too. The adults just need it. And I saw this past year when our social worker at the school district I was in had a therapy dog. And whenever Cassandra came to visit the school, oh my gosh, Cassandra was the highlight of the day. Like, little kindergartners would walk up to her and they would get down on their knees and they would go, "Good morning, Cassandra. Can I give you a hug?" And of course, the dog would just be there, and then they'd hug the dog. Or a second grade kid would be sitting there and reading to Cassandra when 10 minutes before, the little girl couldn't read out loud because she was so terrified. And to me, it's really, it reminds me, especially because the school principal or superintendent's become the CEO, something Drucker said, which is, climate and culture will eat strategy for breakfast and give you heartburn all the way through strategic planning. If you're not doing the climate or the culture, you're not going to succeed in anything. And it's not a family, folks. This is a job, but it is an ecosystem that is very dependent upon the humans.
Yeah, I think that, we could spend tons of time, and a lot of things what we discussed so far, whether you're a teacher or a school leader, that really contribute to that climate of a school and that culture. And I can tell you the one of the biggest things that I always notice when I go to a school about their climate is, how does the front office treat me as a guest when I walk on campus? I can tell pretty immediately after having a short conversation with front office staff whether that school's morale or climate is going to be positive or negative just by that first interaction. And it's critical as to, someone coming in onto school grounds, especially if you're, a parent, guardian, a school visitor, or someone that works maybe for that district or the county coming in and as a guest. And it's really good indicator of, how that place is ran and how people feel about that school that you're in. And as I think parents and guardians can attest to, is that, I think it really, that first conversation in the year is really important, whether it's with the teacher or a school employee or district employee. And really starting off on a positive note can really take, the year in that direction, whether it's a positive or a negative one. And I think that as we move into the last kind of bit I want to talk about today is, what can parents and guardians do to support their students' learning and well-being, and to build a positive relationship with their school and their students' teacher is that it all starts with that communication piece, right? I think that really starting off the year, being involved and having a good conversation with the teacher, getting to know the teacher, getting to know the school, getting to know that grade level, and then asking your students questions each day about how their day went, and being specific can really be helpful. And I think just everyone involved in that student's education is to really try to start the year off positive, start off with a positive vibe and interaction, and that can lead to a really prosperous year. On the other hand, I've been in scenarios where, if that first interaction is negative, that can set the tone for the year, and it can cause a lot of issues down the line. And it takes a lot of effort to repair that, especially if it happens early on.
Yeah, and this is especially true with newer teachers or with folks who are maybe seasoned veterans, but they're coming into the area for the first time. Parents, you've got to stop thinking your child is perfect. You have to stop thinking your child didn't do that, or yes, of course they did do their homework. An adult who's in a teaching position really isn't going to try to catastrophically destroy your child's life in third grade. Now, of course, there are the few that are out there who they need to go away as educators, but the majority of them are there for their heart and their soul. And Matt, I'll tell you this, and maybe I should be more formal with it, but Dr. Rhodes, the amount of Kleenex that were provided to teachers who were sobbing after a negative parent interaction was astronomical. It was in the thousands of dollars because teachers give a damn. They give a damn about the kids. They give a darn about everything. They really are trying their level best. And one of the most horrific things I saw was when fellow educators attacked their child's teacher. Why? Just because you disagree with the way something is done, or you disagree with the resources, or maybe you even disagree with the fact that somebody is saying, cookies aren't exactly a great snack. You might want to consider fruit or vegetables or something else. For doing it with the most positive of intention, please don't come in and say that their child's of Beelzebub for doing this. But the other point is that your child isn't an innocent bystander in 92% of these events. Maybe they could have learned from it, and it is a learning experience. But then again, going back to the point about adults artificially escalating many situations, I want people and parents to understand this. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries with your child. You are not their friend. You are their parent. Let the grandparents or the uncles or the aunts or the friends spoil them. You as the parent, you have to say, nope, 8:30 is the bedtime. I know you want to see that Netflix show, but you can't. Okay? And also, let's be honest with you, how many parents jump immediately to the Board of Education or the superintendent? Follow the chain of command. If you don't like the answer, then you go to the next step up. But you have to understand this. The system is built to educate the maximum number of individuals at a time. They're trying very desperately to do individualized instruction, but with the fact that budgets have declined almost 150% in real value dollars from 1980, there's just not enough professionals to go around. And also, I'll tell you this as somebody who was a director of a special education program for a small district. Holy Moses, it is complex. And the school is very, very adamant that it wants to do best by your child. And you may not want them to get the testing, but just like a doctor would say, if they said, we think it could be cancer, but we have to run scans to rule it out. Let's rule it out. Let's rule it out. Because if not, you could be preventing your child from being the most successful they could be. You can disagree. You can say the school's not right. But collectively, there's a lot of knowledge and intelligence in those brick buildings. Let's hope we all get HVAC and air conditioning upgrade before, the hot kicks in. Right, Matt?
Yeah, I can only imagine, when you're in those buildings, when the AC is not working or if the internet goes out, kind of sometimes can be very catastrophic at times. But I think just unpacking what you said is that I think boundaries are critical. I think in building upon what I said earlier is that communication and just understanding that education is messy, it's complex, there's a lot going on. And I think for the most part, I think everyone involved wants to do good. And I think that if you go into that mindset as a child's parent and guardian, I think that in those intentions also coming from as an educator and our teacher and the school community, I think that we can really start the year off on a really good foot. And ultimately, I think just throughout the year, it's just being open to communicating and to be proactive. And I think that proactivity is essential to being, really successful as, allies on the team of your student and child to be successful and to learn something and to, help improve their way that they navigate throughout the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everybody needs to take a deep breath. Don't fire off text messages. Don't fire off emails. Don't call. Take a deep breath. If your kid says, "Mommy, I failed," take a deep breath. Is it the child's perceiving they failed, or is it legitimately they did fail an assignment? Because I can almost guarantee you this. If the child has failed, it's not because the educator didn't give them multiple opportunities. Homework has become a non-existent word in many school districts because educators are very well aware of the fact that once that bell rings at the end of the day, students are going activities, sports, families, recitals, whatever. They know that the best way they're going to get completed work from your child is if they give them time in class to do it. Talk to your child about using time in coaching effectively.
Yeah, I think that there's so much that is going on, and just for people to really be open to being proactive and really being honest with what's going on and to communicate that. And I think that you really outlined it there. And as we finish up this episode, Casey, what's one word or short phrase that you want our listeners to go into this school year with?
The audacity of improvement. And what I mean by that is I want everybody this year to be audacious and see improvement, whether it's in a child, whether it's in yourself, whether it's in the school system. If you walk in and going, "Oh crap, here we go again," that's not going to work. Have the audacity of improvement in your mind and enjoy, because I cannot tell you, we all went into education because we did not see ourselves doing something else. And we saw ourselves wanting to give back. Be audacious. Be bold. Make this year one that your students at their 35th classroom reunion will say, "Do you remember that day that Dr. Rhodes and Dr. J did that audacious, big, hairy deal with us? And man, that was awesome."
Yeah, I think the audacious and is a great way to put it, so that they can have memories of really good experiences that can last a lifetime, and to help them navigate their life as a student and adult. And I think that if we go into that school year, it can really be positive. Mm-hmm. Now that brings us to the end of today's episode of Navigating Education, the podcast. I hope that you found this discussion on back to school tips and advice for students, teachers, school leaders, parents and guardians insightful and practical as you prepare for this new academic year, or if you've already started. Special thanks to Dr. Casey Jakubowski for sharing his expertise and valuable perspectives on how to navigate the first few weeks of school with confidence and purpose. As we wrap up, remember that whether you are anyone that is interested in education, or you're a parent, school leader, student, this is the podcast for you. And we believe that a show like this in this episode can really set the tone for the entire school year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Navigate Education, the podcast on Spotify and YouTube. And for you to stay connected to me, you can follow me on X/Twitter at MattRhodes1990. And then on Threads and Instagram, Dr. Rhodes EDU. Thank you for joining us today. And until next time, keep navigating the ever landscape of education with curiosity and commitment. Together, we can make a meaningful difference in the lives